Right, now this one is definitely going to have less pictures because the last three have taken me about 10 hours each to put the pictures on, and that hurts me little arthritis hands and me arthritis back and everything else. And also, we've got to go back to work, so you won't get the book finished for another 50 years if I keep doing the pictures. I'll put a few in this one. Weird Synchronicity. Go and watch Thomas Sheridan's Hocus Focus and Sarah Mondaini. They do a thing on a Sunday. It's really good. It's all like Fortean and paranormal and like a really good like magazine show on a Sunday evening. And every week one of them picks a book that they one of their favourite books. And guess what? Guess what was this week's book? Thomas Sheridan did The Vengeful Djinn. I didn't know he was doing that. Obviously, he didn't know I was doing this. That's just another one of the little synchronicities that happens when you start doing things like this. It's bloody amazing, and it kind of spurs you on. It makes you excited. It's a brilliant. So that was great. So I'm going to read chapter 3 called Unveiling an Ancient Race. Sorry, there's less pictures. Right, okay. The following account features Phil's Djinn experiences during a trip to Saudi Arabia in December of 1995. On his trip to the Middle East, he was able to make a number of important connections and contacts. The purpose of this trip originally had nothing to do with the Djinn. But as Phil travelled from country to country, he heard more of this ancient race and decided to make learning about them a priority. Phil's uncertain journey. During my tenure in the United States military, I served with a number of individuals who today are in influential positions not only in the American government but also in 2 foreign countries, one of which is Saudi Arabia. On a trip to the Middle East in the 1990s, I discovered that a fellow soldier I knew from our service in the Vietnam War was now a high-ranking member of the security force of the Royal Saudi family. At the time, I was in Israel and sent him a telegram explaining that I would like to visit him and asking if he would arrange entrance through customs without hassle. Within 24 hours, I received an invitation to join him at his home, not far from the Royal Palace, and one of the only luxurious places in the country. I can only refer to this person as Jack because he's an American in service to a foreign power, and his position requires a great deal of anonymity. I have not heard from him in more than 10 years, and as of the writing of this book, have no idea of his current situation. I arrived at the King Khalid International Airport in Ridja and went through customs. The officer there looked at my passport, paused for a very long time, looked at me again, and turned to his computer screen. I got a little worried, and the people behind me in line began to step back as though they knew something was wrong. The customs officer then got on the phone and spoke in Arabic, a language I don't understand. He called over 2 nearby soldiers and had them escort me to a security room. I grew more worried. You see, King Fahd bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud, the ruling monarch at the time, had recently suffered a stroke and was unable to perform his duties as king. Many feared that dissidents would use this opportunity to seize control of the government. Perhaps my friend had already left the country or was jailed by whoever was in control. You can understand my growing concern. Thinking I might also be jailed because of my past military association with Jack. A half-hour later, a soldier walked into the small room, speaking almost perfect English. He identified himself as Captain Yaramesh and told me a car was waiting outside to take me to my destination. I tried to ask him where I was being taken, but he insisted that I not ask any questions. We walked out the security area of the customs building. My mind flashed to an incident Jack and I had in Bangkok back in 1970. I said to myself, surely he must have forgotten about that by now. Outside was a white stretch limousine. The captain got in with me and we began our journey to our destination. I thought, well, they sure aren't going to take me to prison in a limo. But then again, Jack always had a strange sense of humour. As we drove through the city, I was shocked at the living conditions. People were still living as they had lived in the 18th century. We must have passed 40 gas stations on our trip, and the price was no more than 10 cents a litre. Soon we found ourselves in the upper class part of the city. Here the homes were fantastically large, with very expensive cars in the driveway. The difference between this area and the poor section and outer fringes of the city was like day and night. The wealthy Saudi people lived much better than Americans, and the neighbourhood I was now riding through would put Beverly Hills to shame. It was clear that there were two financial classes in this country, the extremely wealthy and the poor. We stopped at a gate and two guards who waved us in. The car pulled into a long circular driveway. As I got out of the limo, Jack appeared and greeted me with a smile and a hug. We went into a small villa they had prepared for me, and we sat down to have a drink. Jack told me he had the rank of colonel in the Saudi security force, a position he had been in for the past 5 years. He asked me about my life since we last met. I told him that for the past 13 years I had been teaching science, and had written a number of books on the various topics. He looked at me, laughed and said, "Yes, but that's the cover story. What do you really do?" I couldn't get Jack to believe that I was nothing more than a science teacher. He was certain I was in the Middle East doing some type of reconnaissance for an intelligence agency. Jack said we were invited to a dinner party that evening with a number of the royal family. He then excused himself to attend his duties and recommended I get some rest. A strange dinner party. As soon as Jack left, I fell into a deep sleep. Not too much later, I was awakened by a knock on the door. It was a secretary from the royal family asking me if I was ready for dinner. What seemed only like a few minutes of sleep was actually several hours. I must have been very tired, since it is not normal for me to sleep so deeply, especially in a strange place. I let the gentleman in and apologised for not being ready. He seemed quite upset and insisted that I hurry because Prince Khalid bin Fahd was attending the dinner party, and it is custom and a show of respect that the guests arrive first and wait for royalty to make their entrance. As I hurried to get ready, dressing in the tuxedo already cleaned and pressed for me, the gentleman, identifying himself as my advisor, gave me brief instructions on behaviour and social protocol in the Arab world, especially in the presence of royalty. The instructions for proper behaviour made me feel like I was back in medieval times. In a strict, serious voice, he told me, "We must arrive before His Highness. When he enters the room, if you are sitting, you must stand. If you are talking, be silent. If you have a drink in your hand, set it down. If you have a cigarette, put it out at once. Most importantly, do not walk up and introduce yourself. You must wait for His Highness to come to you." Those were just the instructions for the cocktail party. There were more concerning the dinner. Do not walk over to the table until the servant asks all present to do so. Stand by your chair and wait for His Highness to sit first. Do not look at His Highness unless he is addressing you, and under no circumstances talk to the Prince. His Highness will make a toast, so be sure you stand and hold the wine glass with your right hand and look at His Highness when he gives the toast. After the toast, you may say thank you, very nice, or hear, hear. Make sure you take one long drink and that Prince Khalid lowers his glass before you do. After he had finished, I jokingly replied, Is that all? My adviser looked confused when I said, Do you think after the toast I can give him the Vulcan salute and say live long and prosper? Of course I was just kidding around, but my adviser didn't see the humour in it. As we drove to the palace, I was reminded that I was not in America. Disrespect in even the slightest form was taken as an insult. At the palace, I entered the hall and started to mingle. I must have looked quite sharp in my black tie tuxedo. Many foreign dignitaries, whose names I couldn't remember, thought I was an ambassador for some western country. One of the servants called us into the main dining room. All the guests, including myself, stood around a large table. My position was second from the right of the head of the table, and I was quite excited to think I was going to sit next to the prince. And that moment, another servant walked in and said that Prince Khalid had been called away on urgent business, and he apologised to all his guests. However, the prince's cousin was to take his place and would settle all business in His Highness's name after dinner. The cousin entered the room with 2 large bodyguards, and everyone bowed. He sat in his chair, and everyone did the same. I was thankful there were no toast, and that dinner was served promptly. The royal cousin looked to be about 35 years old. The other guests addressed him as Excellency, so I assumed he was a minister in the Saudi government. My friend Jack was sitting next to me on the left, and he whispered that it would be all right to ask a question. Before I could open my mouth, His Excellency looked at me and asked if I was an American and why I was visiting his country. I replied that I was interested in learning more about the Jinn. When His Excellency heard the word Jinn, his expression changed from neutral to one of concern and excitement. He seemed surprised to hear the word Jinn come from a Westerner, and it seemed to catch his interest. The Jinn? He said the word so loudly the entire table went silent, and everyone looked in his direction. I will tell you about them. They are very real and live in my country. The story he proceeded to tell me is unverified, but His Excellency seemed very serious. I believe it is the truth. I relate the story to the best of my memory. To catch a Jinn. His Excellency said that a special unit in the United States military had been trying to capture a jinni for many years. His government would allow military and scientific missions into certain parts of the desert where jinn are known to enter our world. He said that the United States was after a technological device that allowed jinn to pass through solid walls and through dimensional windows. When I asked if they ever caught one, he replied that he wasn't sure because that kind of information would be classified at the highest level. I found this an interesting comment and related it to a similar incident of a few years earlier in Pine Bush, New York, where numerous residents had reported a considerable amount of military activity in that area. The military's official explanation was that they were doing training exercises, but a past associate of mine, who was now in intelligence, informed me of a different purpose. According to my associate, the military was supporting an operation being undertaken by a special unit to capture an interdimensional alien, using a portal in that area of the country to enter and leave our world. The main objective of this operation was capturing its technology. I asked His Excellency for a source of more information about the jinn, and he instructed me to read the Quran. He turned to Jack, said something in Arabic, and then looked at me once again and said, "This conversation is over." His Excellency then spoke with a number of his other guests. Jack knew I wanted to ask more, and before I opened my mouth, he elbowed me in the ribs quite hard. This I took as a very strong hint to keep my mouth shut. My conversation with His Excellency was over. After dinner, I asked Jack what the prince's cousin had said to him. Jack told me he was instructed to take me to a mosque at the edge of the city to meet a holy man who knew everything about the jinn. I was thrilled and asked when we could go. Jack responded that the trip would be made in the morning, but he would not be going and would send his assistant, the captain, who picked me up at the airport. A car then pulled up and took me back to the villa. Visit with the holy man. Morning came too soon, and I was again awakened with a knock on my door. It was the captain. He said we must leave immediately and asked me to dress in the more traditional clothes of the Saudi people in order to attract less attention. He told me that the area of the city we would be visiting was not safe for Westerners. I dressed as he instructed and found the clothing quite comfortable, made of the finest Egyptian cotton. I looked like someone who had just stepped out of Lawrence of Arabia. It took us about a half hour to reach our destination, a run-down part of the city inhabited by people who were quite poor. We pulled up in front of a building the captain said was more than 300 years old and a former worship centre of some sort. We were greeted at the door and taken into a room where a very old man was sitting smoking a water pipe. The captain bowed and started speaking in Arabic. He turned to me and said, "Please sit down. I will translate. You may ask any questions about the jinn, but nothing more. Also, you will get only one response to each question. Do not get into discussion with him." I was taken aback. I regretted not preparing a list of questions, since my knowledge of the jinn at that time was limited only to what most Westerners knew. I had no tape recorder, but it didn't matter anyway, because tape recording was not allowed. I did take notes. Even though the meeting was more than 15 years ago, I still remember everything the man said word for word. A dark story. According to the Holy Man, Allah created 3 intelligent races in the multiverse: angels, jinn, and physical beings that include humans and all other alien races in the universe. Angels were created first, then jinn, who were placed on the earth as stewards and masters. They were most loved by God. The jinn are made of fire and have long lifespans and great power. They are able to manipulate matter and change form. As the jinni becomes older, it acquires more knowledge and power. No one knows how long they live, but like all things, they eventually die and are answerable to Allah at the Day of Judgment. In their time in the physical universe, the jinn built great cities ruled by powerful kings. The number of jinn who existed during their time on earth is unknown, but it could have been in the billions. Each group of jinn belonged to clans rather than states or countries, neither of which they had. According to the Holy Man, the clans frequently fought, often going to war over trivial matters. The wars lasted for thousands of years and polluted the environment. Before the jinn wars, Earth was a paradise, but their conflicts were turning it into a wasteland. The jinn grew more powerful, using great and terrible weapons, eventually reaching the point of irreversibly damaging the physical universe. Allah knew that unless the wars were stopped, the jinn were also in danger of destroying themselves. Allah ordered an army of angels to stop them, but the jinn gathered their armies and engaged the angels in a war that lasted 1,000 years. As the war drew to an end, the older and more powerful jinn finally fell. The jinn were cast into a parallel world close to our own. It is said that most went willingly, but some did not. They remain in this parallel dimension today. Some of the jinn were allowed to stay in the physical universe to help repair the damage done by their race, so that Allah's new creation, Adam, could populate the earth. These remaining jinn were ordered to help humans in their early years, teaching them language, the sciences, and the will of Allah. These groups of jinn were known as Amir to the human race and interacted with men and women quite frequently. As time passed, many of the jinn who were allowed to remain behind began to isolate themselves from humans and became resentful. After many centuries, their resentment turned into hate, and instead of helping mankind, they set out to destroy us. The Holy Man said that these jinn were influenced by Iblis, an evil jinni who made it his mission to destroy all the beings in the physical universe who were not jinn. The Amir were then quarantined by angels into certain geographic locations where they remain today. These areas became their home, and is a reason why many places on the planet are thought to be haunted. These places are actually occupied by jinn, who can shapeshift into almost any form they please. The Emir Jinn's main purpose is to keep humans out by terrifying them and preying upon their impressionable nature. What about the role of Iblis? I asked the holy man how Iblis fit into the story. He had just told me. The holy man replied, Iblis was the most powerful of the jinn. He was ascended and even associated with the angels. After the jinn wars, Iblis took the side of his race and refused to help prepare the world for humankind. When he refused, Iblis was cast out of heaven and could no longer associate with angels or other ascended beings. The holy man said the majority of jinn have never seen Iblis and often debate whether he exists or not. Some of the jinn actually worship Iblis and look upon him as a saviour who will help them redeem the world they were forced to leave. To humans, Iblis is the greatest threat humanity will ever face, but to many jinn, he is considered a hero and a Christ-like figure. The old man said that Iblis, still fearing the wrath of the angels, often takes a human form to conceal himself and lead the armies of man against each other in the hope of making them destroy themselves, thus leaving him and other jinn blameless. In one example, prior to a great battle, Allah saw that the leader of the evil army of men was really Iblis. Allah then sent the angel Jibril against Iblis. Jibril is Gabriel in Judaic and Christian law. When Iblis saw the powerful angel descending from the sky, he yelled out, I have nothing to do with this. I am not part of this army, and this war is of no fault of mine. He praised Allah and fled. The great battle was stopped, and thousands of human lives were saved. Iblis's ability to take on human form and become a great leader parallels the Christian prophecy of the coming of the Antichrist, a powerful being who is the devil incarnate and will lead the human race to a great war known as Armageddon. The holy man continued to talk of the jinn for several hours, after which he became tired and asked us to leave. He mentioned a cave near Oman which the jinn used to enter our world. The holy man also said there are a number of towns and small villages in Oman, Iraq and Syria in which the jinn have established strongholds. To me, this behaviour seems to indicate they were creating beachheads to mount an invasion on the human race. When I heard about a place in Oman where these beings could enter our world, I had to see it for myself. I was already in the area and knew that unless I took advantage of my proximity to visit the cave, I might never get another chance to explore it. Majlis al-Jinn. The jinn enter our world through some kind of interdimensional portal. We have many cases in our files where wormhole-like openings have appeared, and strange creatures or beings have emerged. Three-dimensional travellers would be regarded as jinn in the Middle East, but here in the Western Hemisphere they are called aliens. Some Muslims believe there are locations on the planet in which a jinni or a jinn family exists and share our world. One of these locations is located in Oman on the Salma Plateau in a very remote area known as Majlis al-Jinn, the meeting place of the jinn. Although many citizens of Oman, especially in the nearby villages, believe the cave is the home of jinn, the name was actually given by 20th century explorers who were fascinated with the locals' beliefs. I'm not going to be able to say the name of this cave. The original Omani name of the cave was, I'll have to type it out. I'm not even going to attempt that. I'll type it out. Which means the place to harbour goats. Majlis al-Jinn is the 8th largest cave in the world and has the 15th largest chamber. The cave's main chamber is so huge it could fit the Great Pyramid of Giza inside it and still have room. The cave was formed by water that slowly ate away at carbonate rocks in the Tertiary period. The Tertiary period began about 65 million years ago and ended approximately 1.8 million years ago. The cave was not fully explored until 1983, but local residents knew of its existence for centuries and kept their distance because they believed a jinni had made its home there. There were no visible lower exits or passages leading from the chamber to the ground above, only several openings in the ground leading straight down into the main chamber. Water entering the cave collects along the lowest part of the floor, then slowly infiltrates into the fine-grained mud-cracked sediment. The entrances receive surface runoff from a small drainage area, so water never reaches most parts of the cave. While surface temperatures can exceed 90 degrees, air temperatures inside the chamber hover around 60 degrees. Access to the cavern is available only through a free descent of one of 3 vertical entrances in the ceiling, a drop of about 320 feet. A trip to Oman. While still in Saudi Arabia, I asked my friend Jack if he could arrange passage into Oman for me to see this cave firsthand. Fortunately, the weather was still quite cool, and the trip would not be that taxing for a person like me who was more used to the temperature climate of New England. Jack arranged for his right-hand man, Captain Yaramish, to go with me. I was delighted, as I had come to trust and know this man and his family quite well. He didn't even seem to mind me mispronouncing his last name. His first name was so long that he agreed to let me call him Yar. He seemed to find it amusing and told me this is something only an American could say and get away with. Saudi Arabia borders Oman, and our trip that day was short, thanks to the small passenger jet Jack had arranged for us. After about a 1-hour flight, we landed at Seb International Airport, now called Muscat International Airport. Yar told me a vehicle would be waiting for us, and we would drive to a small town called Fins, close to the Gulf of Oman, in a region called the Eastern Hajar Mountains. In Fins, we would meet a person who would show us to the cave. The trip in the 4-wheel drive vehicle was quite beautiful. We drove south on a major road. The view of the vivid blue Gulf on our left was breathtaking, as were the mountains to the right. What impressed me the most was that everything looked very clean. There was not one piece of garbage or one sign of human irresponsibility. Oman was indeed a beautiful country, and I understood why so many statesmen in the Arab world fought as hard as they did to preserve their culture and home. Yar and I arrived in Fins early in the afternoon, since we planned to make the trip the next morning. We spent the rest of the day enjoying meals, drinks, and a little sightseeing. I was even allowed to visit a mosque, a rarity in the Arabic-speaking world. Later, with Yar as my translator, I asked some locals about the jinn. To my surprise, they were quite willing to talk to me, and I was able to gather a number of interesting legends. I was told over and over again that I should not study the jinn, as my curiosity would invite their attention and they would definitely investigate my intentions. The townspeople seemed convinced that the jinn were returning to our world, and one day, if appropriate action was not taken, the jinn might rule human beings. However, it was the hope of all that the jinn would return and peaceably coexist with us as they did a very long time ago. I spoke with one person, a teacher, who said he was always thought tales about the jinn were nothing but legends, until he had an encounter with one in the mountains, close to a town called Al-Jala. Although the teacher refused to elaborate, he said that governments of Oman and the United States know about the jinn and are trying to deal with them. When I asked how he knew this, he replied, after his jinn encounter, he ran into American, Saudi and Omani soldiers who said they had been tracking jinni for 2 days. He went with them to a base in the mountains where he was interrogated for several hours. According to the teacher, the soldiers were told, the soldiers is in like speech marks. Told him not to give details about what he saw. He seemed more fearful of the soldiers than he was of the Djinn. Despite my efforts at persuasion, he would not elaborate on his encounter. I was eager to go to the area where the Djinn have been seen and could hardly wait until morning. We stayed at a small inn and I could not fall asleep that night. I was too excited about our trip to the mountains. The meeting place of the Djinn. The next morning we got up early, had a quick breakfast and met our guide at the four-wheel drive vehicle. I looked in the back and saw not only climbing gear, but 2 9mm pistols. I asked about the gear and was told that in order to get into the cave, one had to rappel down about 100 metres, 300 feet. This was all right with me. I had a great deal of experience climbing mountains and exploring caves and mines. Yar said he bought the pistols because the area is desolate and we might encounter bandits. He and the guide expected no trouble, but they wanted to be prepared. Better to have the guns and not need them than to need them and not have them, he said. Our guide said the cave was about 10 miles to the south and we would arrive in about 40 minutes. There was only one path leading to the entrance and the going would have to be slow as it was very rocky. A half hour later we stopped and got out. Our guide said that we would have to walk about 1 kilometre to reach the entrance. It was a sunny day and the temperature was about 70 degrees, perfect for a hike in the desert mountains. We reached the top of a hill and I saw what appeared to be a large hole with a diameter of about 10 feet. I leaned over, looked into the hole and was quite surprised. I had heard the cave's main chamber was large, but the sight was unbelievable. I was to discover later that this was one of 3 cave entrances. I shined a light into the opening and the beam didn't illuminate the cave floor. Only as the sun rose higher in the sky were we able to see the illuminated ground below. I looked in once again and saw a green mist I assumed must have been coming from the cave's water. The air coming out of the cave was very cold. From my past experience in exploring deep caves and mines, I knew this meant the cave was considerably deep. Our guide then spoke his first words of English to me. "Are you ready, my friend? You must go alone. We," referring to himself and Yar, "do not go in." I knew Yar wasn't going in, but I hadn't expected our guide to decline as well. In retrospect, it was probably a sign that something truly sinister was down in that cave. We anchored several clamps in the rock and hooked the rope on the rappelling harness. I began my slow descent into the cave. The only illumination was the light of the sun, projected almost straight down into the hole from above. As I was midway down, a mist began to rise up. I thought I heard echoes coming from the darkness of the cave. They sounded like a human voice, speaking Arabic. I stopped my descent, and the mist appeared to take on a large form just below me. I found this strange because this part of the mist was not illuminated by the sun, yet it glowed with a greenish hue. I heard the voice again, but this time it spoke English. Although there was quite a bit of echo, I was absolutely sure it was saying, "Leave my place." My 2 companions must have also witnessed the same thing because they spoke rapidly with each other and seemed quite agitated. Although I couldn't understand what they were saying, one word was clear: Djinn. They ran away from the cave opening, leaving me hanging about 75 feet in the air. Fearing that they were going to leave altogether, I climbed out and saw them running toward the vehicle. I got out of my climbing gear and yelled for them not to leave. Yar yelled back, "Hurry, my friend, it is the Djinn." I scrambled to catch up with them at the car. Breathlessly, I asked them both, "What the hell is going on?" Yar replied, "Didn't you see it? It was a Jinni taking form and telling us to get out of the place at once." Although I thought I had heard a voice and saw a vague cylindrical-shaped mist, both men insisted they saw the shape of a Jinni and clearly heard a voice ordering us to leave. Yar and the guide refused to go back to the cave. insisting we leave the area immediately. I wasn't going to hang around in the mountains by myself, so I had no choice but to get in the car. On our way back to the village, both my companions said prayers to Allah in Arabic. Our guide refused to talk about the incident, but Yar kept repeating, I had heard they were real, but didn't think too much about it. They are real. The next day, when I tried to get more information, Yar informed me that some constable of the town had asked us to leave. Yar said it would be a good idea to take his advice and leave as soon as possible. It was disappointing to be so close, yet so far from learning more about the Djinn. Apparently, the people in the town thought I had awakened a nasty old jinni, and they were afraid of reprisals. Yar and I made our way back on the road and to the airport to return to Saudi Arabia. Soon after, I spent a short amount of time in Syria to gather more information, and not too long after that, I returned to the United States. Not long after my visit to Majlis al-Jinn, the Omani government opened the cave to the public, and by 2007 it had seen more than 100,000 visitors. It became so famous that even a number of American and European commercials were filmed there. For some unknown reason, the Omani Ministry of Tourism closed the cave to all people in 2008, and now no one is allowed to enter. Their given reason was safety concerns, but perhaps the Jinn proved stubborn and unwilling to give up their meeting place. I heard rumours from people in Oman, Syria and Iraq that Jinn have already infiltrated into our world and yield a great influence in a number of villages and cities in those countries. I will never forget the final warning I received from our guide when Yar and I left Finns. Watch closely, my friend. The Jinn have returned to our world.